A lot of people are skeptical of me when I say that there is a plenty linking people who voted for Jeremy Corbyn in 2017 and people who are voting for Reform UK today. I've said that there are plenty of people who would have done so, probably voted Boris Johnson in 2019, and they were part of the people who switched from Labour to Conservative after Labour changed their position on Brexit, for example, kowtowing to what they believe to be elitists, liberal elitists, quote unquote. Because Jeremy Corbyn in 2017 was very kind of Labour values, and then 2019 was very much part of the Brexit election, and that kind of broke apart the coalition that had been built in 2017 that won Labour more seats and more votes than anybody was expecting in that election. And broadly, it is because they are seen as being outside of the political mainstream. And so I don't necessarily think that it is unreasonable to say that there are probably plenty of Reform UK voters nowadays who supported Labour under Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, Labour are currently polling 14 points behind where Jeremy Corbyn was polling in 2017. Stands to reason that there's a significant cohort who voted one way in 2017 and the other now. Either way, we now have some interviews that Politics Joe did with Reform UK supporters who claim they supported Jeremy Corbyn, outlining their reasons why they've swapped, and we're going to have a little bit of a listen in. And I'm going to link this video in the description for everyone so you can have a watch later, and go and subscribe to Politics Joe as well. Give them some love.
I voted Jeremy Corbyn in 2019. I'm fundamentally a populist. I'm against the establishment. The establishment, Labour and Tories, have failed us. Tories for the last 14 years, Labour before them, and they opened the wars and everything that went on with that. So, I saw, I was, what would I be, 19 or so. I was kind of naive, but I saw Jeremy Corbyn as a genuine voice, as someone who was trying to say something a bit different against the kind of Tory government. So I voted for him, and now I'm a Reform vote. So
you can call it naivety, or you can say that he's someone who is not particularly in tune with the political positions of either party. But that represents loads of voters in this country. They do want something different. And whilst their political positions are fundamentally at odds with each other, both Corbyn and Farage, at least, they present to the public genuinely and sincerely held positions. That's one thing that Corbyn continually gets praise from right-wingers who disagree with him. They will praise him by saying, well, at least he's sincere in his beliefs and he speaks from the heart, which is true. I just don't know why, if you believed in the project that Jeremy Corbyn was offering in 2017, why you'd completely change tack and vote for something that is completely different and opposite in policy terms moving forward. That doesn't make any sense to me.
That transition from Labour to Reform is a clear one.
There was a time when I was a Labour supporter back when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, but I went through a political journey that basically brought me to where I am now, being certainly on the right side of politics. And I just look at the major parties and just think most of them don't stand up for what I hold dear and what I care about. And Reform UK is the only party with a large enough following that I think will push the country in the direction I'm.
What policies are you describing there, though? I'm interesting. Maybe they'll expand on this. We're only a short way into the video. I'd really like to understand from these people what policies they believe Reform UK are going to fix the country with, outside of, less migration. We all know you want less migration. That's fine. We need to have other policies, friends.
Is sort of the first opportunity in a long time for us to get sort of a real change in politics, and actually to include a lot of people which may have not even been interested in politics at all. And that includes a lot of young people as well.
That point there, saying they appeal to people who've been left out of politics, that is very true. And that's also people who were part of the contingent who voted for Jeremy Corbyn in 2017. Remember, turnout was way higher in both 2017 and indeed in 2019 than it was in 2024. The move to the centre disenfranchises people outside of politics, and that is quite a sizable cohort that you can tap into to be electorally successful, appealing to those outside of politics. This is what Donald Trump did in the last election. I genuinely believe the swing demographic, young men especially, who voted for Donald Trump, they did so because he was appearing on podcasts. He was speaking to them as a disenfranchised group. He was going through new media that they access and they don't pay attention to legacy media. Like the Joe Rogans and the Theo Vons of this world, that kind of circuit, if you can call it such a circuit, that's usually close to apolitical. It doesn't present itself as a political platform, even though Joe Rogan is very political in terms of the things that he talks about and the guests that he has on. It seemed to be apolitical. And so normies are going to be in contact with that. And you can see the level of interaction these people have with politics in how many Democrats won down ballot. In multiple, I think 4 states that Trump carried, Democratic senators won, and not by small margins either. People like Elisa Slotkin, Ruben Gallego, Tammy Baldwin held their Senate seats in red states of the Electoral College. And that was because people were turning up to vote for Donald Trump and weren't bothering to vote down ballot. It was a personality position that they supported, and they didn't even look at the rest of the ticket. And broadly, if you can represent yourself as being outside of the political mainstream, that's the easiest way to speak to people who look at the political mainstream and believe that they are not being represented. Whether that comes from a left or right-wing perspective, you can speak to people either way. And that's the problem with Labour moving to the right and now being in government. They can't be seen as iconoclasts anymore. They can't be seen as outsiders because they are now the establishment. They are now in power, as they would say. And when the left are in power and they're doing unpopular things that are right-wing in nature, they will seem just like the Conservatives to everybody who has the potential to be involved with politics from a radical perspective. And with no space for that from the radical left, they'll move to the radical right.
Yeah, so house prices are influenced by supply and demand. If you've got a shortage of houses, then housing becomes expensive. And as it currently stands, we're letting in nearly 1 million people every year, net 906,000 last year. Letting in millions of people increases demand by millions of houses, and that makes housing more expensive. So I don't think people realize just how extreme that number is. We used to let in tens of thousands of people nets per year. But to keep up with the current rate, you need to build a city the size of Oxford, and one the size of Cambridge, and one the size of Peterborough, and one the size of Bath, and one the size of Durham, and one the size of Lancaster. And you'd still have 24,000 people left over, so you need to build a medium-sized town.
People are going to be living in more than one house each. And even then, that 906,000 was 1 year, and it was the year after the pandemic, which made up for years when we had very little migration because there were lockdowns. So I don't think you can necessarily use that maths to your advantage when that's going to be down by 2029. But regardless, it is true, the population has increased, and you will need to build houses to accommodate the new people in your country. But it's interesting, if you ask these people, should we be having a lower or higher birth rate, they'll probably say a higher birth rate because they recognise that population increases something we need for economic growth. I believe, we need to build more houses. Governments have failed to build houses. The private sector has failed to build houses. We need planning reform and state investment in housing. I've said both of these things. But you don't need to start saying immigration is the only problem here. There is an investment problem here.
We will never, ever build enough houses to keep up with the current rate of immigration. The only way we're ever going to cope with that is if we go back to normal.
But we are reducing immigration. We are literally reducing immigration at the moment. It was 1 year where we had 906,000. It was less the year after, and it will be less moving forward. These numbers are going to stabilise later on.
To someone earlier who used to be a Jeremy Corbyn voter, and he's moved towards reform. What do you think the crossover is there, if any?
Oh, well, anti-establishment, obviously. A sense that the giant corporates now dominate the world that we live in.
They dominate our politics now as well because they donate to you.
Politics is very much in the pockets of the big corporates. And it's where it's where my thinking and Corbyn's does cross over. Corbyn was a Eurosceptic right from the very start because he thought that what Brussels would do is be good for big banks and big businesses and bad for everybody else. Well, he was pretty much right. So there are some crossover.
He's right in that term. He mostly disagreed with free trade. He's a protectionist. That was the real kind of left-wing platform against the European Union, and that would embed capitalist economics and oppose socialist principles and government intervention, like through competition law and laws that would prohibit the kind of nationalizations that a Corbyn-led government would want to do. In reality, the EU is pretty good at breaking up monopolies. It's pretty good at regulation of big tech and big business. We are now far more open to exploitation from big business in 2025 because we have joined CPTPP, which allows our governments to get sued through investor-state dispute settlements by giant international corporate businesses. This would not have happened within the European Union. And you could say, well, no justice. At no point have Reform UK said that it's good that we're joining the CPTPP. They just said that we should leave the European Union and leave it at that. Well, that's where you're wrong. Richard Tice said on X, the Everything app, that CPTPP, being joined by the UK, was going to be one of our Brexit benefits to help stimulate growth in the country. So actually they do support cucking ourselves out to big business and big corporates, because now we are open to get sued if we do anything that might inconvenience a big business within that trade agreement. So much for British sovereignty.
And similarly, quite a lot of Trump voters would in the past have thought Bernie Sanders was the guy that they would have voted for. And the unfairness of the economic system as it's currently structured, I think, is at the root of it. Something very interesting.
What are you going to do to fix that? You want lower taxes on the richest in this country. You are going to make it worse if you get into government. You know that it's unfair, and you're going to make it more unfair. You're out there campaigning with people like Donald Trump, who also is somebody who is friends with Javier Milei, who have made things more unequal in both of their own countries.
Going on with Gen Z, as the Americans call them, almost like a rejection of what they're being taught at school. They're kind of being taught that they should hate the country, hate its history. Nelson was a terrible man, Churchill was even worse. And they're kind of just sticking two fingers up gradually to this and saying, this is ridiculous. Why are you doing this to us? And the other one is ambition. A lot of them feel, how are we going to have what our parents and grandparents had? How are we ever going to have a house? I also think that generation suffered through lockdown more than the older generations. They were denied many of the things that kids normally growing up would have had. So it seems to be a sort of defiance.
Well, yeah, because we were guaranteed things like trade union representation and a job for life and being able to move out of our parents' houses before the age of 30. We had collective bargaining agreements. We had loads of things that were better for workers that we don't have now, or things have become casualized. We have the gig economy now. We don't have the state-led industries that guaranteed prosperity in left-behind communities through all of the years of the post-war consensus that we don't have anymore. That is the deregulatory economy that you support, Nigel. You're a Thatcherite. You supported this. You supported selling off our oil and gas, which we could have done to build a massive sovereign wealth fund to make the regular people of this country more prosperous. And instead, we've allowed Centrica to profit and other giant oil companies to profit off of those.
That's coming into a whole load of them. A level of ambition to want to make money, get a good job, do well, that I don't think was there with the millennials who were busy talking about work-life balance or whatever else it might be. I'm not including.
Yes, one of the things that our parents had that we don't have is a better work-life balance, which is the casualization of the economy has caused, which you supported because you're neoliberal.
You, obviously. So, yeah, there's something going on. It's more with young men than it is with young women at this moment in time. And we're seeing that pattern repeated. We're seeing it in France. We're seeing it certainly in Italy, to some degree in Germany, and in America. I mean, who would have thought that Trump would have got 44% of the under 30 vote? I mean, that is completely, from 2016, this is like 3 times the figure. So, yeah, something big's going on, and you're seeing it today here in Chelmsford. Quite a lot of young people here.
Like to portray Reform as this sort of fringe far-right party. It's not at all. Nigel Farage gave a speech where he spoke about how Reform is at the centre ground of British public opinion. The Labour and Conservative parties just don't represent what huge fractions of the public actually want. So that's why we have such low voter turnout. Labour got its majority in Parliament with only 20% of the population actually voting for them. So what's happening is millions of people who otherwise would be disenfranchised with politics or who might be forced to vote for one of the other parties are realising that they've got this opportunity to vote for a party which is supplying what they actually want.
I see.
There is a kind of kernel of a lot of truth that's being said there, especially when you look at the result of the election. People are disenfranchised because the nature of the economic system meant that parties had to very specifically appeal to a certain demographic, and everyone outside of that just felt kind of left behind. And people will look at a party that, whilst they have a strong electoral mandate, they don't have a strong popular mandate. And that is a recipe for political disenfranchisement. This guy isn't wrong when what he's saying there.
what Labour and Tories have done, mainly since when Tony Blair got in, I've just seen British culture has been diluted and it's watered down, and it's not the I read about what life is like before I was alive. I look at old archive footage, I look at photographs, I hear what my parents say, what other old people in my community say about what life was like. I just think I want that for myself.
And again, you have big business to blame. You have deregulation and neoliberalism to blame for this. It's interesting when they say, oh, well, British culture is being undermined. And they'll go, well, it's because there's too much immigration. I'm like, well, this is a development of culture. What's actually undermining British culture is allowing American megacorporations to destroy our local economies. It's allowing the entirety of the functioning of society to be taken up by the tech giants. What's more likely to be undermining British culture? Mr. Patel opening up his off license down the road, or huge swathes of the way we interact with the economy being entirely owned by other countries' massive megacorporations? I'm sorry, like, migration to Britain has been a constant of our existence, especially post-empire. And that's good. I support these things. I think this makes our country a better place. What I think makes a country worse to live is where every single piece of local character gets completely and utterly removed and replaced with the faceless injection of bland American corporate nonsense.
Thousands of homes is not going to cut it. We need millions. And building millions of homes is an unrealistic project. You'll never do that. Governments can announce whatever targets they want. That doesn't mean they can hit them. And, it's a devastating cost. So when my parents moved to my hometown, they could afford 2-bedroom terrace house for £10,000 to £15,000. Today, that same house would cost £250,000. And the interest on the loan could equal the cost of the house itself. So you might be paying £500,000 for what used to be only £10,000. Now, the average Brit makes £30,000 a year after tax. Before tax. Before tax. So after tax, you're left with 20,000 or so, which means your lifetime earnings after tax, if you work for 40 years, would be about £800,000. If you're forced to spend £500,000 out of your 800,000, you've just lost most of the money you'll ever spend to immigration, essentially. Housing.
But it's not immigration that's caused the majority of these rising house prices. This was a failure of monetary policy. Now, I'm not saying that we built enough houses, because we haven't built enough houses, and there has been a mismatch between the level of investment in increased housing development and the increase in population size. But we also had an increase in population size during the baby boomer era. We also had an increase in population size after the war. And what did we do? We built houses. We built council houses. We protected rent prices so that it was affordable to save up for a deposit because it was owned by the state. There's plenty of scope for doing these things to deal with rising populations by increasing the supply of housing. We just haven't done that since the 90s when we stopped building council housing, thanks Thatcher, and of course thanks Blair for that. The problem with rising house prices is because of failures of monetary policy since 2008. Since 2008, to essentially magic growth out of nowhere, the government, both under Alistair Darling as Chancellor, and then to a greater extreme, George Osborne as Chancellor, engaged in lots of quantitative easing to try and inject new money into the economy to stimulate growth. Now, whilst Darling was more even-handed, George Osborne was not. What did he do with this new money injected into the economy? He gave it to already rich people to inflate asset prices. And what do you think they did with all that extra money, all that extra liquidity? They put it into property. Because property is something that is integral to the UK economy. You can't just not have houses. It was a very safe bet. There's a reason why every financial advisor tells rich people to go and invest in property, because they know that the prices are going to have to rise ad infinitum for multiple different reasons. First of all, because people with mortgages can't go into negative equity because that's bad for moving. That's a practical problem, which I get. There's a political issue of the swing demographic being mortgage holders, you need to appeal to mortgage holders, you need to appeal to homeowners by saying, look how much we've increased your net worth by stimulating growth in house prices. It seems a good thing when house prices rise politically for that very specific reason. And in terms of macro policy and the way in which people view macro statistics of the economy, higher house prices means you've got growth. It's not good growth. It's not growth that's been good for the health of the overall economy, for the utility of keeping a population happy, but it's growth. And then you can go to the public at the next election and say, look how much we've grown the economy, when all that's happened is that asset prices have risen and it's made it unaffordable for everybody. Has increase in population alongside a lack of the requisite number of houses being built been a problem? Yes. Is it the main problem? No. The main problem is failure of monetary policy. Because the thing is, right, if you were doing quantitative easing and you were using that new money to invest in productive capacity for the economy, that'd be fine. Wouldn't be a problem. But George Osborne gave that money to rich people to inflate asset prices deliberately because they are the people who donated to him. And they donate to the Conservative Party. But the two markets in the UK that continually saw growth throughout the Cameron and Osborne period was property and finance. They were having a whale of the time, whilst people in working class communities across this country were having their public realm shredded to pay for George Osborne's austerity. Do the QE to make the money to build the council houses, and you have a very different world where you use QE to buy already existing stock of housing. It's really, really simple. I mean, if you put QE into existing assets, they go up in value. If you put new money into investment into increasing supply, it keeps prices stable and grows the economy, of course. Because the thing is, I never opposed quantitative easing. I'm not going to say that expansionary policy was a bad thing. I believe expansionary policy is a good thing. I am a Keynesian. I believe in expansionary policy, but I believe in expansionary policy targeted at investment, not to give money to fucking rich people like George Osborne did.
Housing is an essential necessity, which used to be a tiny fraction of the cost.
I actually had a look this morning where the highest turnout is and where the lowest turnout. The highest turnout was in Winchester, it was in Cambridge, it was Liberal, Lib Dem and Labour seat strong, right? The lowest turnout, you were looking at 25% in some cases, was in Yorkshire and the Humber, and it was in Lincolnshire. These are all places where Conservatives won and Reform was second place in nearly all these seats. So you're seeing a situation where most normal people have no way of getting their voice out. They have no representatives in government, but they represent 40% of the country. I discussed it. They're horrible ideas what's going on in the spectrum.
Especially in the kind of communities that have been left behind by neoliberalism. I've said it before and I'll say it again. A lot of the places where you saw people angry at migrants are places where there used to be loads of jobs in industry that magically disappeared when state support and industrial strategy disappeared from our economic policy. It's always Thatcher, every single time. And these are people who have been consistently, every single time, ignored by politicians. Why the hell would they turn up to vote for people who only care about the demographics that are relevant in terms of first past the post too?
They're all going to vote for Reform. And if we can get the things we typically don't vote to vote, I mean, it will be a Trump-esque landslide in 2029 if we can mobilise that support.
But doesn't quantitative easing give money to rich people through asset owners and banks? Traditionally, yes. Because quantitative easing is swapping bonds for bank reserves, essentially. So you take money from the central bank, you buy bonds from banks usually, and then they get transferred into overall reserves. New money is created by the central bank, and they swap that for the financial instrument from the bank, who then have that as reserves. That's traditional quantitative easing. Under EU rules, for monetary policy, you're not allowed to buy bonds directly from the Bank of England from the government. So the central bank cannot buy bonds directly from the government. But that's a specific EU ruling. This is monetary financing of government deficits. You're not allowed to do that if you're a member of the European Union. Once we left the European Union, there was a thing that we could have done called the People's Quantitative Easing, which is essentially where you use QE to fund government spending directly. And that's where, under PQE, as it was dubbed by Richard Murphy, we could have directly put new money into new investment projects. Again, both increasing the money supply, of course, but also increasing the number of goods and services in the economy through extra investment. So if you do the people's quantitative easing, it's overall net good for working class people. The problem was, of course, that we were doing QE for the rich.
Fascinating. Well, I don't understand it, though, is why people in our big two parties seem to have no comprehension of what social media even is. They don't bother. And then they become party leader, and their parties spend millions on advertising to try and build up some sort of followership, and none of it's really genuine because it's not been built organically, it's not strong, and so there is no connection. Whereas, I've always had, and you know this, I've had a team of people around me. We've worked hard on social media for well over a decade, and we've got a big following. 5.5 million people following me across the various platforms, including 1 million on TikTok. So I've actually reached out and engaged. So a lot of these young people think they know me, and to some extent they do. The other party leaders haven't even tried, and frankly.
Well, you say the parties haven't tried. Have you not seen Labour's latest AI content, slop furry, definitely questionable lyrics content that they've posted? And you say that Labour haven't tried to do social media. Well, ironically, I feel like the part of the left that's done the best on social media is the Trades Union Congress. I feel like the TUC have been doing social media way better than any of the political parties have.
Dare I say it, but a lot of our leading political figures are pretty dull.
Keir Starmer, for one, comes across as a bit wooden, bit of a charisma vacuum.
I think a big part of it is sort of just the image generally, and the image of approachability and of inclusion, the inclusion of young people. I think that is what actually is going to get people to the ballot box, people going out campaigning. And I think the party is doing that quite well already, which is why you're seeing a lot of big young people like me here.
Do you think that Elon Musk has helped with the last couple of months? Do you think that's brought young people into the party?
Massively. He's such a hero figure to the younger generation.
How is he a hero figure to the younger generation? His approval ratings are in the fucking toilet. Most young people hate the fucking rich. For what all other reasons I fucking despise this man. At least usually would think that he's pretty good at politics, but there is just zero basis for what he's saying here. People look at Elon Musk and go, isn't that the guy who ruined Twitter?
Generation. I mean, hey, he's going to send them to Mars, That's what young people have told me that.
Press X
so
to
yeah,
down.
I think Musk helps. And Musk, and whatever he might say about X, Y, or Z, Musk is a pretty cool figure. The bomber jacket, the shades, the space programs, all the things that he's doing. And I think there's a kind of young reform element out there that think this is pretty cool.
Morton, yeah.
Do you think that Labour have made a big mistake by not reaching out or offering an olive branch to him?
Well, Labour don't know what to do. And to be fair, they're in a very tough position because he's the richest man in the world, who Labour would clearly love to invest big money in Britain with a big battery factory or whatever it may be. And he's lobbing bricks at them every day, particularly Starmer. And the last 48 hours, what happened in 2008 as Director of Public Prosecutions. I don't know, you don't know yet the truth of, was there a...
You know what, right? If you want any proof that Elon Musk is not cool, you can wear as many bomber jackets and shades as you want. This is not a cool man. I know I'm not exactly the best person to be placed to say these things. I know I'm engaging in a little bit of glass house stone throwing here, but this is not a cool person. This is not a cool human being. When they added Cybertrucks to Fortnite, the kids made a game-wide effort to target anyone who used them, middle-aged divorced dads like Elon. That's basically true, right? The kind of people who have midlife crises and buy Dodge Rams, they're the people who like Elon Musk. Except they've moved on from Dodge Rams towards Teslas.
Case there that he should have bought and didn't bring for whatever reason. So they're in a very difficult position. But in fact, more broadly, they're in a difficult position with the incoming American administration because all of them have been incredibly rude about Trump over a period of time. And that's a problem because our relationship with America.
Sorry. No, but Helena, he's doing an X, like his app, X, the Everything app, which is named after the letter X, the coolest letter. It's funny, because he has the mind of a teenage child. X is a cool letter, so I'm going to call my child X, and I'm going to call my social media app X. Like, it would be funny if it wasn't so pathetic. The thing is I think they probably did think Elon Musk was cool, like, 10 years ago, when they're watching the SpaceX launches. But then he was out there calling insulting the people who are going to save the men trapped in the cave in Thailand, right? And then that was the moment where he started being uncool.
Particularly in terms of defence. I mean, without them, what are we? We're nothing. So, yeah, he's got some real problems here.
Hang on a minute, Nigel. Without America, we're nothing? That's not very British patriot of you. That's not very empire nostalgic of you. I thought, post-Brexit, we were going to stand on our own 2 feet. I thought, with all of this sovereignty that we gained from leaving the European Union, we were going to make Britain the centre of the world all over again. Are you actually admitting the truth, which is, of course, what was always the truth, which was that Brexit was going to turn us into America's little cuck bitch boy? Not that we weren't that when we were in the EU, because of course we were. I mean, look at Blair and Bush and Iraq. We were always America's little cuck bitch boy. But at least we had some relationship diplomatically with our close neighbours. And now we don't have that. And you're going, well, what are we without the Americans? I actually think our country's probably fine without having to listen to America. It's just really funny watching these people, because they just drop the ball on what does or doesn't count as patriotic over and over and over again. They will constantly say how much they hate the country itself, not the state of the country, but the country itself. Or you be out there saying that other countries should be ruling over us, like fucking America. Like, are you actually a patriot, or are you just a nativist? Because that's what they are. They don't believe in Britain or the British community. They believe in whiteness, essentially, a lot of the time. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.